placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far, far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday, the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. August 20, 1890 was a fairly normal day by most accounts, except for the fact that one of the most extraordinary American horror writers was born on this day. His name was Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Born in Providence, Rhode Island, and primarily raised by his grandfather and his aunts, the young Howard became proficient at reading and writing by the age of 3. Early in his life, Howard's grandfather became the center of my entire universe, since his father had been committed to a psychiatric hospital and died when Howard was just 8 years old. His grandfather traveled often on business, but wrote to Howard regularly. It was also his grandfather who encouraged his literary interests and introduced him to his early influences: The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, 1001 Nights, and The Age of Fable. A long story short, H.P. Lovecraft would go on to pen some of the most enthralling horror stories ever, and his influence in the horror, science fiction, and fantasy genres is unmeasurable. However, he remained almost completely unknown during his lifetime. He spent his entire adult life living in poverty, and he died from complications of cancer at the age of 46. It wasn't until several years later that his work would gain the recognition it deserved decades earlier. One such story of Mr. Lovecraft's was titled The Call of Cthulhu. Cthulhu, or Cthulhu as some would say it's pronounced, was considered a great old one within the pantheon of Lovecraftian cosmic entities and was worshipped by cultists. Cthulhu was described as an enormous creature that had features comparable to an octopus, a dragon, and even humans. Cthulhu lies in a deathish slumber in the Pacific Ocean in the lost city of Relay, presumably never to awake, although he has been known to run for president here and there.
With that being said, what does H.P. Lovecraft and dark ambient music have to do with each other? Well, quite a bit in this case. In 2014, Cryo Chamber, the label founded by Atrium Carcere mastermind Simon Heath, unleashed the first in its now annual series of H.P. Lovecraft-themed collaborations. And it's important to mention right from the get-go that this is in fact a collaboration and not a compilation. The first entry in the Cryo Chamber H.P. Lovecraft collaboration is of course none other than the Cthulhu album. And Cthulhu, by most accounts, is probably the most popular character in the H.P. Lovecraft mythos, and it was definitely a great place to start. For this first collaboration, the album gathers together 12 artists who were on the Cryo Chamber label at the time, and as Simon Heath put it, they linked their studios to create this massive, nearly 80-minute album. Now, personally, I first heard H.P. Lovecraft in the early 2000s. I want to say like 2002, 2003. But back then, it didn't totally resonate with me. I could definitely see back then that, the influence it had on music and, other horror stories and stuff like that. But it didn't really click with me until really after these Cryo Chamber collaborations came out. And I got on board with these collaborations probably around the third one. And as I recall, there was a package deal where you got all three of them for like a really cheap price, for like $40. So I was like, screw it, I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna give the H.P. Lovecraft a shot, and it was wonderful. It really just finally, then it resonated with me. And shortly after I bought the collaborations, I bought this book too, which is a collection of almost all of his great stories, and just suddenly H.P. Lovecraft really made a lot of sense to me. I just began to really love it and just start to do history on his life and all his other stories, and it was just really a really profound moment for me. Cthulhu is of course, as I said, a fully collaborative album, meaning not a compilation. Everything was recorded together so it would sync up and become this one massive song. And for this one, it was 12 artists who were on Cryo Chamber at the time, and it's interesting kind of going back to this first collaboration, because a lot of these artists are no longer involved with Cryo Chamber, whereas some have become staples and regulars in the genre, on the label, such as Alpha Zone or Atrium Carcere or Cryobiosis and Ugasanine. They're all been with Cryo Chamber pretty much since the beginning. It's interesting seeing that this is one of the first big projects they really took on other than their own individual albums. Whereas other projects like Helgrath, Dark Matter, and Cielos just sort of disappeared after this collaboration, and they've produced very little, if even any, albums since then, so it makes you wonder if there's some sort of H.P. Lovecraft curse. The atmosphere in this album is quite immense. As the album slowly progresses, it's like, as it starts out, you could just sort of mentally picture like the ocean waves in front of you slowly moving, and almost as if like some sort of, I guess like a whirlpool's opening up and you're slowly descending down into this whirlpool. It's strange to have access to air, and you can just see all the sea creatures. And slowly, it gets darker and darker as the song progresses. The sea creatures just kind of slowly start to disperse. And eventually, you find yourself in total darkness. And it's then, when you see the great old one upon you, well, should I say, sleeping in his kingdom called Real. And it is when, as the song progresses, slowly but surely, you can tell the great beast is going to awake, and that's sort of how the things progress in the song. Slowly but surely, you can just feel like something bad's going to happen, and by the time the song reaches its near climax at the end, the great beast awakes and presumably ravages and destroys the land. Occultists rejoice as they too are destroyed, but it is just a massive, massive moment when you feel and hear all these just thunderous roars of this great beast awakening up and just coming out of its ancient slumber to destroy the world and the land. And I feel like the artists really wonderfully captured this feeling of this slow descent into the ocean, and it's just some of the best dark ambient I think that Cryo Chamber had created up to that point. And obviously Cryo Chamber has become probably the most notable dark ambient label ever at this point. I think they are by far the most successful one. And it's just immense atmosphere, immensely deep, suffocating dark ambience in this one, but still with a small hint of melody and enough just, action to really hold your attention. A sprinkle of piano here and there, and it's just a really immense album. One of the things I've always really loved about a lot of Cryo Chamber releases is they have fantastic artwork, which is almost always done by Simon Heath, and the Cthulhu collaboration is no exception. On the front cover, we have the mighty tendril of the great old one poking out of the water and ready to wreak havoc upon the land and devastate all of the masses. And it's just, the cover artwork alone is pretty inviting, just real massive, just really a cinematic and dark experience. You know something immense is going to just terrifying is going to happen when you dive into this album, and of course it delivers quite well. On the back cover we have all of the artists featured and the length of the recording. And on the inside we once again have all the artists and a small bit of artwork behind them. And on this other panel here we have, well, I don't know, but more of some abstract material, I guess. And then on the other side we have the what appears to be some ancient, perhaps an ancient hall from the kingdom of where Cthulhu once dwelled, or does dwell, should I say, when it was still above land. And then we have the CD itself, which again has the artwork. And on the digipack inlay, we have this picture here, which is which is basically the beginning of the Call of Cthulhu story. So really cool artwork, just a really cool, collaboration all together, and it really, I think these collaborations really sort of set a fire under people's asses and really, made H.P. Lovecraft kind of make an even bigger resurgence. And it seems like in these past, 6 years since this album came out, there has been a lot more, not just dark ambient artists that have surfaced, but a lot of just, artists in all genres across the board that have had H.P. Lovecraft themed songs, or even, full albums and full, conceptual projects centered around H.P. Lovecraft. So it's been pretty amazing. And although, as of course we all know, H.P. Lovecraft has been influenced for many, many years. I mean, for me, I always think back to the 1984 Metallica song called Call of Cthulhu, or Merciful Fate had some, H.P. Lovecraft themed stuff in the early 90s, but, so it's always kind of been there, but it's sort of a little more subtle. Now it's really kind of coming out, and I think it's really awesome that, a lot more artists are embracing that influence and having it shine through in their music, whatever, their chosen music style may be. It's just really awesome to me. And I think, but I think really in the dark ambient field, it really was, a real, defining moment when these collaborations first started, because I think a lot of dark ambient artists were influenced. And I mean, even myself, I have created H.P. Lovecraft themed songs, and I have another H.P. Lovecraft themed album coming out in the near future. When all is said and done, there's quite a bit that can be said about these H.P. Lovecraft themed collaborations. And, the great news is that every one of these has been really quite enjoyable, and although I didn't know a lot about these collaborations going into each one, it really, provoked me to look up information and go back to the stories, just look up general information on YouTube and, the internet in general, to find out information about them before diving into them. And I have enjoyed all of the Cryo Chamber collaborations immensely, and but this one still kind of holds a special place in my heart. I mean, I guess maybe because Cthulhu is, one of the most popular characters. It's the one I've always kind of known about, and I think that's the case with a lot of people. And although this one is, the first, it's also only a single disc at 80 minutes, these collaborations have expanded all the way up to 3 discs and, something like 2 hours worth of music. So it's become quite this immense affair every year for the label to create these collaborations. And, the artwork has gotten better and better, and they just dove deeper and deeper into the whole mythos of H.P. Lovecraft lore, and it's really impressive stuff, and it's probably the coolest thing that's really come out of the label. I mean, I've loved a lot of individual releases, but I've continuously enjoyed every single one of these collaborations. Well, guys, that'll about do it for this episode of the Inner Sanctum, and as always, I gotta thank you for joining me here. I hope you were able to learn a little bit more about H.P. Lovecraft and the Cryo Chamber collaborations. So, thank you once again, and I will see you next time.